So basically this seems to be an unsound piece sack, this knight takes e6. Maybe it's, the previous seemingly provocative play by black, dropping the queen back to the first rank, fin checking the bishop, that led to white, trying to sack a piece to get at black's king. But there's no time, there's not enough time here. c7, knight takes c7. So with c7 necessary, just rook takes g6 maybe was a lot better. So maybe, rook takes g6. Black could take on b5, play check, rook a1, and black actually starting to get some counterplay on the first rank here. So maybe this is what put off white with this. So white ended up playing c7, which is not really that great. So we saw now this pin in particular stops even rook takes g6, and white's in real trouble now. He's losing material for nothing. So rook takes d6, and that was it. So a 24-7-7 brought down with the Semi-Slav. Let's look at another game example. A player called Sveshnikov. This is in round 1, so his opponent was 2-6-5-7. Avruk 2-6-5-7. Sveshnikov 2-5-2-5. So knight f6. e3, we've gone into the Semi-Slav again. So the triangle blocking in the queen's bishop. So what did white play here? Well, instead of encouraging black to use this mechanism of d takes c4 followed by b5, white played b3. So what on earth do we do against this if we're going to take up the Slav at some point? Well, this game showed knight bd7. So we're not going to take on c4 now because white can retake with the pawn. Bishop d3, bishop e7. What is black's strategic plan evidenced from this game? White seems to have a pleasant position. Well, first of all, how do we deal with this problem bishop now? What Sveshnikov did was simply b6 here. So he's adapting to the position. He might put his bishop on either b7 or a6 here. After knight c3, he put it on b7. And maybe he's going to liberate slowly with c5. So queen c2, rook c8, he's preparing c5, and he plays it now, c5. So it seems a major strategy with the Slav to bear in mind is your problem queen's bishop. And white doesn't seem to have too much here of an advantage. So bishop takes f3, got kind of dramatic with these exchanges here instead of an ordinary recapture. Expecting maybe, e takes d4, but d takes e, bishop takes e takes d7, and now rook takes c3. So the game's kind of come tactically alive, it seems, with these exchanges. Bishop takes d1, taking on c3, and it seems after queen b8, so black's not just taking on d7 because the bishop takes h7, winning the queen, or allowing a nasty pin, knight takes d7, bishop f5. Black played queen b8. Here, what's the material situation? 3, 4, 5 pawns against 4, 5, 6, 7, but black's a piece up. So queen b8, bishop f5. Is white's pawn on the 7th rank enough? Let's have a look at the rest of the game here. So black is trying to put more pressure on the pawn and gets it finally, but he loses his a pawn. So pawn situation now, 4 pawns for black, 6 pawns for white, so only 2 pawns for the piece. Can we consider the rest of the game a kind of technique with black just a piece up? This endgame doesn't seem that great for white. So Sveshnikov just is improving his position all the time now. And maybe starting to blockade white's pawns. Gain more pressure now. Knight takes f5, nifty way of recapturing the pawn. And here the bishop is able to cope with these pawns, it seems. So after bishop a5, black has the plan of just winning the a pawn and making the bishop stop this queening pawn. Or actually even simpler, just win the h3 pawn first, then come back and win the a pawn. So let's have a look. That seemed to be a sharp tactical exchange in terms of a number of captures there. So black aimed to liberate the light squared bishop with this slow preparing c5, but then we had a kind of fireworks after this c takes d4. If white had just played something like knight takes d4, e takes d5, Rivka gives a small advantage for white. So what would we do here? g6, not to give white the f5 square. Knight e5, bishop c5. So apparently this is almost fine for black. Rivka thinks this is roughly equal. So if we had a more common game, knight takes d4, just e takes d5. So not minding actually the isolated queen's pawn. Because you've got good compensation here, the use of the e5 square, your pieces are kind of liberated. So we saw fireworks in this game. D takes e6. So bishop takes f3, taking on d7, taking on c3, taking on d1. So the upshot was black was a piece up, but white had a few pawns for it. So the d7 pawn was rounded up, and we saw this endgame transition with black a piece up. In case you're wondering, why couldn't white just give up the bishop? I just think he felt it was lost, actually because of g4 check. So king f4, bishop d6 is mate here, and if king retreats then fe. So white wanted to keep the bishop on basically, but the endgame's still pretty dire, just a piece down. And black cleverly temporarily sacked a pawn here, because after this king e5 he factored in knight takes f5. So now these pawns are not enough for black's bishop. Okay, another game example. Let's take this game, Bayaramanda 2339 against Ayatov 2532. Okay, the player with black was higher rated than his opponent, so let's not give too much credit to the opening and maybe more to the resourcefulness of the players. In theory, black's expected to win, but so this was the dull exchange variation. Now this is one of the main things which has put me off years back from playing this whole Slav system, is the exchange variation, because now look, you've got the problem of a boring position because we've got a symmetrical pawn structure, and to be honest I found it difficult to annotate a couple of games from the recent World Championship match with symmetrical pawn structures because I thought they were dull. I know it's sometimes in Kramnik's style to grind down opponents from tiny advantages, but they don't sometimes make for the greatest games to video annotate. I'd rather annotate Nesmetinov's queen sacks, etc., or Morozovich, or dynamic, aggressive players. Especially when the pawn structure is symmetrical, it means that there aren't that many interesting magical opportunities for either side. So, but white does have the extra move. So how did black neutralise the extra move? After knight c6, knight c3, a6. Okay, so it's not perfectly symmetrical in terms of the pawns moving one or two squares up. Bishop f5. The pieces are, though, very symmetrical. Now e6. So it seems, how can black win from this kind of position? He plays knight d7. So with knight d7, he's not mirroring the symmetry of the bishop. So he's left out that. So why has he left out that? Maybe he's got a plan now of b5, knight b6 to c4. Because c4 is often a vulnerability in these lines where white captures on d5. Let's have a look. Rook c1, and now bishop e7. Knight d3, so also c5 is slightly vulnerable for black. So that's something that both sides can use with this c file, these outpost squares. knight a4, again targeting c5, and now black unbalanced the position. He gave up his light square bishop for that knight on d3. So if he's got the two knights, what can he do with them? Well, he shows he's trying to first lock in white's light square bishop with this f5, and thankfully the symmetry is broken, so we're in for a more interesting treat here for the remainder of the game. Bishop g3, b5, knight goes to c3, and now knight b6. So we see now that black is using the knight quite masterfully to come to c4